Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello, and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and this is the podcast where we talk about leadership, management challenges, communication challenges, mindset, and all the things it takes to present yourself so that you can get the results you need. Before we get to our guest today, I'd like to invite you to see where your presentation skills are strong by taking our free 4-minute quiz at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where you can see where your presentation skills are strong and where perhaps a little bit of support could get you the results you need and the recognition that you deserve. My guest today is Matt Brown, who's a veteran founder and entrepreneur dedicated to aiding entrepreneurs, CEOs, business leaders, and the broader business community in fostering positive change. Matt has founded 14 companies across a span of 25 years, successfully exiting multiple businesses. And in the limelight of the host of the globally celebrated Matt Brown Show, Matt has steered over 850 episodes to success. I'm really impressed. I don't have that many, and it's quite a lot. He's recognized for his superpower of asking and getting business leaders to reveal their well-guarded secrets. He's crafted an unmatched network with depth and diversity, hosting a sterling array of guests, including billionaires from 6 continents, New York Times bestselling authors, Navy SEALs, prominent professors, scientists, and a legion of business thought leaders. The show has now grown into the repository of high-value content. He's a 3-time Amazon best-selling author, and he's also known for his leadership interventions, where through professional speaking, masterclasses, and personalized coaching sessions, he shares the wealth of knowledge he's accumulated over the years of hands-on experience. All these initiatives stem from a driven desire to usher in a positive change to the business world, one startup or one leader at a time. His mission is clear: to facilitate the growth of aspiring entrepreneurs and business leaders, steering them towards creating a meaningful impact in the world. It was a very interesting conversation. I know you'll enjoy it. On to the interview with Matt Brown. Matt Brown, I am so happy to have someone awesome like you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Elizabeth. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. It's always interested in speakers, speakers who have really useful advice, and you have so much, and you have interviewed so many great people. It's really very exciting. Before I get to my specific questions for you today, let me ask you, who would be your dream interview? If you were to interview someone who's no longer with us, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who should be listening?
Great question to start. I think I'd interview Nelson Mandela. Obviously, I'm from South Africa originally. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I'd want to interview him, and maybe specifically what I'd like to ask him is, on the day that he was released after 32 years in prison, why did he choose to influence South Africa in the way that he did? Because he had a choice not to. And he pretty much had, groundswell support the day he left prison. Obviously influence is an ethics thing, isn't it? There's negative influence and then there's positive influence. But ultimately it's a choice as business leaders, as people, as persons of influence, like Nelson was, it's a choice. And I'd be very curious to know why he chose that, because in Africa, there's so much corruption and people with corrupt ethics, so to speak. And if he didn't choose that, right, like my life would have been massively different, and millions of other South Africans too. And what he did, as everyone knows, he unified South Africa, and he was the face of our country internationally. And he was the voice of what is possible when it comes to positive influence. And so, yes, that's what I'd ask him.
Oh, great. Well, boy, I'll be there for that interview. I'll definitely want to hear that. So I wanted to ask you, you talk about so many things and you have so much to say around influence, but I've been curious about a recent series you've done called Secrets of Fail, #fail. And let's talk a little bit about the lessons we can learn from failure. And I'm curious what made you decide to start this series.
So I'm a great believer in this idea of counter narratives. So if there's a particular narrative that you see in your industry or on social media that you feel isn't entirely accurate of what is a truism in entrepreneurship or business leadership or public speaking or what have you, that it's your responsibility to paint the narrative behind the narrative. So in my book, Secrets of Influence, I share a framework called the counter narrative framework. And that's what I was really doing with this idea of failure, because when you go to LinkedIn, what do you see? You see Elizabeth being super successful and Matt Brown being super successful, and everybody else in social media loves to praise their successes. And I think as a community of business leaders, we tend to praise success far more than we do failure. In fact, God forbid anybody failed in public, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I was trying to do with this counter narrative, because as you well know, Elizabeth, failure is a prerequisite to success.
Yes.
And the more you fail, the better, the more you learn, the more you become, the better, the more you become, the better person you become in terms of influence and your ability to scale your company or become a speaker and impact your target audience and what have you. So all I did was I interviewed, I think it was about 150 CEOs. I think the aggregate revenues were over $10 billion, about their failures. So talk to me about when you lost that business, when you lost millions in revenue, when you had to lay off, 250 people, when you spent millions on products that never saw the light of day, when your partners ripped you off and stole money directly out of the bank accounts. That's the true narrative, right? And I think as a society, if we can find the courage to talk about our failures more than our successes, then what we're able to do is positively influence people. For instance, if I've failed in business or my business died, there's a massive amount of insight there, lessons there, stories there. And if you have the courage to share those lessons, insights, and stories about your darkest hours, like that's the stuff that people pay attention to. That's how you get attention. And that's how you ultimately make a difference. Because I would much rather learn from the mistakes of 150 CEOs than make one decision that forces me to lose my livelihood. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so I think that is a narrative worth talking about. I think failure is a conversation we should be celebrating as much as we celebrate our successes. And especially for young first-time speakers, entrepreneurs, and things like this, because, when they enter the business world for the first time startup founder, for instance, their whole mindset is that failure is bad. And because they've been taught that, what happens when you lose that NHL game, right? Well, it's bad. What if you don't get an A on your grades? Well, it's bad. Why? Because you won't go to college. And so this is why I'm saying, so in the real world, failure is necessary, right? And you need 15 years of failure to become an overnight success. That's the truth. And so that's what I wanted to do with my platform and that series and in the book.
I'm curious of the many that you interviewed. Did you have anybody who spoke about being able to talk about failure when it felt like it was too dangerous? because I know that the way I was raised, uh, I was one of the early women in my business at that point, and I had the feeling that if I failed, then all women failed. And I know from many of my friends of color that, if the Black executive, God forbid, the Black female executive fails, then then it's failure for everybody, that sort of thing. What are your feelings about that?
Yeah, it's probably a very nuanced answer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think someone, felt like it was too dangerous. Do you know what I mean? To talk about an experience that they had where it was so traumatic that they weren't comfortable to talk about it. I think,
Oh, well, that actually be too dangerous to ask for help,
oh, too dangerous to
which
ask for help.
then got you into the failure, into the crash.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, you can talk to me about that.
I've done that one too. Yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can share. There's so many stories like this. I mean, this is the idea of market timing. So,
Mhm.
so in my previous business, we were doubling revenues every year for 3 years, and by all accounts, we were, successful, right? Quote unquote, whatever that was. And I remember sitting down with my mentor at the time, and I said to him, "Listen, I have the opportunity to move to America, but unfortunately, I don't feel like I can run a business in another country when I'm not living there. That's a pretty hard thing to do." And then he said, "Well, sell it." So
Ah.
I'm like, what? Why would I sell this business? We've been doubling revenues every year for 3 years, global domination, and I was stuck inside the bottle of my own Kool-Aid. And
Mm-hmm.
I wish I'd listened to his advice then. And I think my pride got in the way, because if I just sold it, I mean, if you know that you're the type of entrepreneur that builds and sells, builds and sells, builds and sells, well, then sell it. You have
Mm-hmm.
you have a great story, sell it, take the money and build something else, or buy a business with customers and don't take the risk of startup. Like,
Mm-hmm.
just buy a business and scale it. And unfortunately, I didn't listen to him, because literally, 18 months later, COVID happened and the whole world changed. And so then I couldn't sell the business, and so on and so forth. And I had this story, similar stories repeated to me time and time again. There was an entrepreneur called, I think it's Peter Shannon, and he was in the fracking analytics business for mining. So they would work
Mm-hmm.
with mining companies to help them understand where sinkholes might appear so that the shafts would, collapse or prevent that from happening. And same story, massive scale, amazing niche, underserved markets, 250 people, massive scale, en route for an IPO. And then the whole world changed for him too. And he missed his
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to sell, because he was also thinking about how big he could take this IPO, rather than, because he had a number of PE firms come to him and say, "Hey, we'd like to buy you." And he
Uh-huh.
was like, "No, no, 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 no." He was also stuck on the Kool-Aid train. And so you see these types of stories, right? And it's like, well, and when you hear them, you think, well, where am I in my business? If I'm doing $10 million a year or doing $1 million EBITDA every year, should I sell now?
Yeah.
What could I do with that money? You see, and I think these sorts of stories, it's all about perspective. Because I think if you're wealthy in perspective, you can always generate wealth. But if you're
Mm-hmm.
poor in perspective, you will always remain relatively poor. You see what I mean? And so these stories really help. Certainly, I hope so, and I know that many of my audience believe this to be true. But it's all about giving you a perspective on what your own journey is, so that you can make more informed decisions.
That's actually fascinating. So my next question was about how do you know when it's time to cut your losses? And what about all those people who depend on you?
Hmm. It's another great question. So I think there's two things, like on when to quit your business. I was interviewing Steve Blank. He wrote the Lean Startup Method, and a number of others. But he's like, seen as a true influencer in the startup space. Like, how do you build and scale a company? When I was interviewing him about his book, it was all about pivoting the startup's technology towards the problem so that you can scale. So you don't
Mm-hmm.
build something that nobody wants or uses. But then I said to him, I said, yeah, but Steve, what happens when you're passionate about one problem, okay? But now the market doesn't want that problem, or you can't commercialize that problem, and so you start pivoting, and so you move away from the dream that you had for yourself and your business towards a problem that you actually don't care about. And so then you do start scaling and you do start raising money, but it's really not a business that you love. So do you stay there or do you quit? And then that's the question. When do you know when to quit? Because I'd rather have a smaller business that I love than a business at scale that I hate. And that's actually what my previous business was. There was a gap in the market, but there was also a market in the gap, and we built this amazing operating model and we just scaled, but it was leads. And I hated the lead gen business. It's a terrible business to own, but it was successful. Anyway, to answer your question specifically, there's two things here. One is the vision. So are you in love with the vision of your company? Because if you're in love with the vision, and the second thing is your business making money? Because if you're in love with the vision and the business is making money, that's the dream. But if you're in love with the vision and it's not making money, then you have to fix the business problem. However, when you quit, is when you no longer in love with the vision for that company and it's no longer making money, because then you're the one that needs to pull it out of the fire. And unfortunately, if you're not in love with the thing or the vision of this company or the impact that you want to make, then it's probably time to quit. The other one to consider is when there are no new answers to new questions in your business. So for instance,
say more about that, please.
Yeah. So in other words, if you're working 9 to 5 in South Africa as a business and you can't commercialize it there, well, what if you worked, 5 p.m. to 5 a.m. as operating hours and you serve the US and Asian markets? Do you see what I mean? So it's when you keep asking more difficult questions, what if, you keep asking new questions, but when you get to a point where there's no new answers or new things to try, then that's also probably a time to quit.
It makes me that the company that I founded, the opera company that I founded, filled a niche, and then the market changed. And it took me sort of a year of thinking about it and then 6 months of working with a consultant to finally say, actually, we're done. We need to be done. And she said, she was the woman who helped me start the company, who helped me turn myself from a performer into a producer. Said, how do I actually run a company? She's the one who taught me how to do that. And she said, yeah, I knew that's what was going to happen. I just knew you weren't ready. And it took 6 months of her talking me through it for me to realize, oh, actually, there is no answer that works. The market has changed. And so time to let it go. So I relate to that. I'm glad that it wound up opening other doors for me, but also to recognize anybody who's listening, who's in this position, allow yourself to grieve. Allow yourself to mourn the loss of the dream. And that, yes, there will be something else, but it's a loss. So definitely going back to the mistakes. Well, actually, you talk about the role of failure in corporate growth and how it really is a stepping stone. I don't know if people get taught this nowadays. I hope they do. Are there ways that we can learn less painfully, or do we just have to live through the pain?
Yeah, there's no shortcuts. Unfortunately, my wife always calls me shortcut Matt because I'm looking at how to go further fastest. But there's no shortcuts when it comes to failure. Like to your point, when a business dies, it's a big thing and it's traumatic. You have to, I remember having to sit with 55 people who represented 55 families during COVID and go, listen, you guys are no longer going to get a paycheck. And I didn't outsource that to my COO or any of that. I did that because that was the right thing to do. And the right thing is always the right thing. And And so that whole period, as this business was going through this really tough time, was really about grief. And at the same time, weirdly enough, my mother passed away. So it was just this double header of like personal grief and then grief in the business sense. And grief is a funny emotion. Like it's not like happy, sad, or anger, or depressed. It's like it's a different thing. It just comes in waves, and you're not many people just aren't prepared to, or aren't equipped to manage emotions like grief effectively. So in the business sense, well, what do you do? And there's the biggest cure to grief is time. And so when that business eventually died, I was taking a lot of shit on social media by people who didn't understand what was really going on. And so it was just like this melting pot of pressure, right? And grief and anger and sadness and frustration. But also a lot of empathy, because, empathy, you have to be empathetic with yourself, firstly, to say, hey, I've lost companies before. I've also sold companies, but when a business dies, it's not you that died. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's just the business. And I think I remember when my first business died, I was 26. And in fact, sorry, I sold my first one when I was 26. And so I thought I could walk on water, and the next one then died. And I thought that I was the failure. You know what I mean? I thought that I should be taking my grief out on myself. And that wasn't the right thing to actually do. The right thing to do was just to recognize that businesses die every day. 99% of businesses don't survive past 4 years. So that's the truth, right? So when you learn to separate your identity from the event itself, it gives you it gives you bandwidth that you can then use to, create momentum for the next venture that you want to create. Because again, when you reflect on that traumatic event of a business dying, that's when you start to really recognize, well, what should I have done? Well, I should have sold 2 years earlier, I shouldn't have built technology products or try to take a services business and convert that to a technology platform business. Like, I should have hired more effective senior management people. You see what I'm saying? So when you process these things through your grief and you just sit in it, then with time, you're able to recognize what you will now do moving forward so that you don't repeat the same mistakes.
Do you have any thoughts about there are no shortcuts? You have to go through it. How can you surround yourself with people who will help you recognize when you're heading towards a mistake?
It's just mentorship. It's no entrepreneur, nobody is an island. Like, we all need help. Everybody needs help. I think what gets in the way though is our pride. We don't, we feel like, well, if I ask you for help with the speaking thing, then the pride thing will be like, well, then, Elizabeth will think lesser of me because I asked her for help, right? And we see this all the time, and it's especially with youngsters. Nobody wants to ask for help because they feel like they can do it on their own, and you can't.
And you should be able to do it on your own. There is that lesson gets brought in somewhere.
Yeah. So even now, like with my business, all I'm doing in this first month of the year is looking for partners, that can help me do things better than I can do it on my own. I suppose it's the principle of, surround yourself with people that are more intelligent, but than you are. Don't be the least smartest person in the room, as they say. But it is all about asking for help, like recognizing that people know what you don't know. They see what you don't see. And again, I use that bottle, the analogy of being stuck inside the bottle of your own business, so you can't actually read the label. And so a mentor will go, hey, but dude, like, I've been here before. In fact, I've been here many, many times. And so trust me when I tell you that you should sell, you should listen and heed that advice, but if you don't ask, you don't receive. And so I think today, especially, surrounding yourself with partners like mentors, advisors, strategic partners, resellers, digital advertising agency, like whatever that means, for you, is to pull the trigger on that, because it can really help you to build a better business faster than you could on your own.
And in a corporate culture, it's about finding your allies within the company and finding your allies outside the company. Many of the people I work with, many of my clients come in and they've got lots of they're networking laterally, if you will. People are at the same level, but they're kind of afraid to get someone who's more experienced. And I always think, well, ask someone their advice for just 20 minutes. And everyone's got 20 minutes. And see if you can get advice and then listen to it. Do something with it. Keep track. Some of us, myself included, might need to hear it more than once, but ultimately, taking the time to stop and think about that.
Well, it's what they say, right? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Yeah.
It's I suppose it's this poverty mindset in corporates. It's kind of like, well, there's not enough to go around. You're all racing against each other to get a bigger share of the bonus pool, but really you can genuinely go so much further in as a career, if to your point, Elizabeth, if you know who your allies are, right? And you work together to solve problems for each other. You see what I mean? But for me, it's all about this abundance mindset, right? So there's so much more to go around. Like there's another crazy one. So my last book was Secrets of Influence, right? So I get this lady books a meeting with me under the banner of a sales call. So when she arrived, she starts asking me all these questions about, how did I come up with the name of the book, Secrets of Influence? I'm like, well, that's my superpower, is unlocking secrets from business leaders. And so Secrets of Influence, I'm an influencer, blah, blah. But it didn't feel right. And eventually it turns out she pipes up and she goes, well, look, I'm not going to sue you, but I own the trademark Secrets of Influence. So I'm like, what? She goes, yes. And she says, but you can't trademark a book name. So I'm like, well, why are you here? Why are you here? Why do you believe? And I said, where are you based? She goes, no, she's in Canada. I'm like, dude, I'm in America. We're not even in the same country. We're not selling the same thing. Like, trademarks are about protecting like who delivers specific services. Like, what are you doing here? Like, I don't understand. Why are you trying to threaten me? You know what I mean? And it was a sad thing to experience because, like, I'm definitely not about stealing someone's future meal. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
I'm here to elevate others. I'm here to partner and work together to build a better world, better society, better businesses, what have you. And that's always been my MO. But yet here was someone who clearly felt that I was a threat to her because of a book that I wrote. And by the way, you can't trademark the name of a book. So, like, that's what I mean. Whereas what she could have said was, hey, I bought a copy of your book, or I love the concept behind your book. I've been following your show. How can we partner together? Clearly, you've got a big audience. I'm offering corporate, whatever services, and I'd love to partner with you, and not even raise the trademark thing. You know what I mean? Like, why do you feel like that there's not enough to go around? And I think that's what I mean by this poverty mindset, where if you think that there's not enough, there's always not going to be enough. But if you think and you believe that there's an abundance mindset and there's always more to go around, there's enough to go around for everyone, you'll start making better choices. And I think that's really what our ultimate power is, whether you're sitting in corporate as a senior manager, or you're a CEO of a big listed company, or you're a startup founder, right? It's all about that mindset. And if you shift your mindset, you'll start making better decisions. You'll find strategic partners in the corporate ladder. You know what I mean? Like, you'll just become a better person of influence. And I think that's what's really important today.
I love that. That's really a very exciting way to think of it. Why does it matter to be a person of influence?
Well, it matters because influence is all about elevating others before yourself. And when I ask 10 CEOs what's influence, I get 10 different answers. Most people, when you say the word influencer, they say, or they try and commoditize the idea of influence into influencer marketing. And influencer marketing is really about self-enrichment. So I have 1 million followers. You pay me $5,000, $10,000 to promote your product that I don't really care about or don't really use. And it's a pretty poor form of influence, right? But when you think about Nelson Mandela, Elon Musk, what are they doing? They're elevating society through Elon through SpaceX, Oprah Winfrey through her shows, Nelson Mandela through the political sphere. All the great true influencers in the world always elevated others. That was their focus. The why behind the Matt Brown show, I mean, I've been running it for 10 years, 850 interviews now. The why of the show was always about contribution. How can I help entrepreneurs succeed through information sharing at scale? Meaning, how can I influence them and elevate others before enriching myself? Do you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why influence matters, because the whole world is problems. But together, right, especially if you're in a position of power, of influence, if you wield that in a positive way, you can truly change the lives of people. And I think we all need, some help along the way.
I love that. Thank you. Well, Matt Brown, that has been, I think that's a great way to wrap it up. Let me ask you, if someone's listening and saying, yes, I want to know all of this, I want to, rather than listening to 850 episodes of the podcast, can you give us one tip to that someone could do today as soon as they hear this?
So Plato said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, if a man does not learn to cultivate and activate his own influence, he will eventually be ruled by lesser men. And the thing that I'd like to challenge people on, or maybe get them to consider, is to start doing something about it. Because oftentimes I think we're sitting on the sidelines because we have this fear of judgment, or we feel like we're not good enough, or maybe we feel like we're suffering from imposter syndrome, or whatever it is. But if we need to get over that, right, whatever that narrative is, because if you can get over that narrative, work with an abundance mindset, and choose to solve a real problem for someone, or just be kind, right, to a colleague.
Speak up on someone's behalf.
Yeah, speak up on someone's behalf. Like, elevate others. Start elevating others in whichever way you choose, whether that's just picking up the phone call and going, hey, Elizabeth, how's things going? I haven't spoken to you in 6 months. What's up? Like, whatever it is, doesn't need to be, you don't have to move a mountain, right? You just need to start moving small stones, and eventually that mountain will move itself.
I love that. Thank you so very much, Matt Brown, for joining us on Speakers Who Get Results. And I'll put all his information in the show notes, so there's many ways you can find us. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please tell your friends, subscribe to us on whatever app you're listening, and especially leave us a good review on Apple Podcasts, because that's the one that gets us the good ranking, so that more people can hear great guests like Matt Brown. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'll see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.